Next round of cookie crumbs.
Hi, we're presenting the chapter on analyzing assessments. I'm Audrey Wyatt.
I'm Misty Moore.
And I'm Bridget Kane.
We'll begin with creating the test. When we create the test, we want to consider time restraints. We want to consider how much time, if we're going to use one class period or more for the students, and make sure that we let the students know this. We want to use the objectives that we set earlier in the unit, use these objectives and turn them into test questions. We'll group similar items together, such as true, false, or multiple choice within the test. We want to make sure the items are arranged from the easiest questions to the most difficult, and make sure that you keep questions and answers on the same page.
At this point in our PD session, we're going to stop and do an activity. We've created some task cards for our teachers and our participants, and there are test questions and items for the test, and so we want to have our participants work with their groups and put these items in order, paying attention to grouping similar types of test questions together and keeping the test item with the passage or the map that it goes with, and we want to think about going from easier questions to more difficult questions.
When we administer our tests, we need to take stock of several things. First, I think, is our attitude toward the test. We need to not make a test a gotcha moment, but just simply a seeing what we've learned moment, and we need to have a really positive attitude about tests. A lot of children struggle with test anxiety, and if we can be positive, it helps them. We need to make sure our instructions are clear, that they understand what they're being asked to do. We need to not give pop quizzes, because that's more like a gotcha thing. And we need to alternate how we distribute our tests, and we need to explain the time restraints. For example, I teach high school, and we often take essay tests, and so students need to know if it's a 1-period test or a 2-period test, or if they have a 30-minute window. They just need to know how much time they have.
We also want to pay attention to our test validity. The test validity will drive the students' grades, so each test item needs to be checked. This will also determine the student's grade point average, which leads to their college admission. So it's very important that we make sure every item on our test is valid, and it's important to check these items before distributing it to students.
After we administer the test and assure that our test is valid, we want to score the test in the appropriate way. We want to be sure before we begin scoring the assessment that we prepare and check an answer key so that we are sure of what we want our correct answers to be before we start grading the test. We want to, if at all possible, to score the test blindly to avoid any bias. And then we want to check the scoring, whether it's machine scored or teacher scored. After we score the test, we want to just check over it and make sure that we've scored it correctly. After we've checked our scoring, we want to be sure and record the scores in our grade book before we hand them back to the students. At this point in our PD session, we have a podcast for our teachers to listen to, and this podcast is talking about traditional grading and how it supports or does not support authentic learning. So we hope that our participants would gain a lot of new knowledge from this podcast, but we're not going to show it right now for the sake of time.
So after we have taught and given our tests, we need to analyze our assessments. And there are 2 ways to do that, through quantitative and qualitative analysis. And we're going to deal with quantitative right now. Quantitative analysis is really best used with norm-referenced tests. Quantitative analysis helps us decide whether to keep an item or get rid of it. It helps us decide its value. And it helps us to look at the distractors to see if they were quality distractors or if they need to be changed. it really helps us to look at our multiple choice questions and see if they're doing what we need them to do. On this slide, we also have an item analysis video, which is very good, and which in a regular PD session we would show and discuss with our participants.
Okay, this slide is analyzing assessments. We're looking at the item difficulty. It's important that we know the item difficulty because it's going to tell us whether or not the student is being tested on what they actually learned and if they learned what was taught. It helps us discriminate between students who did and did not learn the information that they should have. We want to look at the distractors. The distractors would be in a multiple choice test, for example, the test items, the answers that distract the test taker from the correct answer. They need to be able to distinguish that. Also, we want to look at the difficulty index and the discrimination index. And on this slide, we will watch a video from YouTube on analyzing assessments, the item difficulty, during our PD session. We don't have time to do that right now.
And continuing with analyzing our assessments, when we think about qualitative analysis, it can be used for both norm reference test and criterion reference test, but generally is more applicable to criterion reference test. This is where it's non-mathematical, and this is where we would look at the actual content validity. We would have it confirmed. We would find any technical faults with the content itself.
After we've discussed the different ways that we analyze assessments and the item difficulty, we have another activity with some task cards for our participants. We have different test questions from the original assessment, and we've given them some results from those assessments to analyze and determine the quantitative analysis and the item difficulty for those questions, about 4 to 5 questions.
And after we have analyzed our assessment, we want to consider our next steps based on the information we've gained from that analysis. We might want to institute some student conferences to talk with students specifically, and usually you can use that when you're doing writing. We might need to adjust our pacing. Maybe we went too fast and they just need a little bit more time. What I usually find is that I need to adjust my teaching. Maybe my expectations weren't in line with what I actually tested. Maybe my test wasn't in line enough with what I actually taught. This also can give us some help in realizing where we need to scaffold and how we might need to group our students. And then I think we can also practice retesting here. We could see, for example, I teach high school and I have 3 classes that take the same test. And if one of those classes bombs or if all 3 bombs, I have to look at the test and recognize that there might be a problem there rather than with the students.
Okay, for our debriefing, we want to debrief the test after the students finish it. We can do this by discussing problem items with the students and get their opinion. We need to listen patiently to the students' reactions to the test and what they thought. We don't want to make on-the-spot decisions. Just listen to what the students have to say and give ourselves time to think about it and analyze it. We want to be equitable with changes. We'll ask the students to double check when we give back the test, make sure that we didn't make a mistake, and ask students to identify the problem so that we can fix it for the next test.
After we discuss debriefing, we want to take our small groups again and have them think about the test that we analyzed in the previous activity. And we want them to discuss some potential problem items that they might discuss with the students, or some potential problems that the students may have had with the assessment itself that we created in the test assembly activity. So we want to have them discuss those things with each other and think about how they might debrief their class after they scored in this assessment. And then after we do the debriefing activity, we would wrap up for the day and have our students, our participants, fill out the rubric assessment for the day. And we thank them for coming, and we thank you all for listening to our presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.